Welcome back to the deep dive. Um, Today, I want you to mentally travel back to 1991. Just picture a teenage bedroom in Toulouse, France.
Right, so we are talking way before the modern internet era.
Exactly. There was no high-speed internet. There's no GitHub to, copy code from. Definitely no Unity or Unreal Engine. There was just an Amstrad CPC computer, a huge stack of floppy disks, and two high schoolers staring at a CRT monitor.
And they are trying to build a commercial video game from absolutely nothing.
From nothing. It sounds like that classic garage band mythology, but applied to software engineering.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to explore that pure grit of early game development, look at the humble reality of the 8-bit industry, and really understand the vital role of internet archivists in preserving digital history.
Yeah. And to do this, we are analyzing a very specific and honestly quite moving document. It's titled Tribute to Those Who Pay Tribute. It was written by a developer named Julian Alvarez,
We should probably clarify the source itself, because it's a bit of a time capsule. It was archived in HAL.
which is a major multidisciplinary open access archive.
Right, and it was archived there just recently in October 2024, but the text itself was originally written back in 2012.
So we are looking at a memory of a memory here. Alvarez is writing in 2012, looking back at his teenage years in 1991, and we are unpacking it today.
Precisely. It's a retrospective on the creation of an adventure game called Alive. But what makes this text so valuable isn't necessarily the game itself, it's what it reveals about I guess you could call it the MacGyver era of development.
The MacGyver era. I love that. Because when I read about how Alvarez and his partner, Arnaud Laplace, built this game grid, doesn't even begin to cover it.
You really have to understand the total vacuum they were working in. These were high school students. They didn't have computer science degrees.
Wow.
They didn't have mentors. There were absolutely no online forums to go ask for help if your code broke.
And it wasn't like they were trying to make something simple, like a Pong clone.
Right.
They were swinging for the fences. The source mentions they were heavily influenced by sci-fi cinema.
Specifically, the films Escape from New York, which was known as New York 1997 in France, and Planet of the Apes.
So they wanted a narrative-heavy cinematic adventure game on an 8-bit machine.
Yeah, which is a massive discrepancy between ambition and actual hardware capability.
And the tools simply didn't exist. This is the part that kind of blew my mind. They couldn't just open a program to draw the game's graphics. They had to build the graphics editor before they could draw the graphics.
That was the reality of the era. The tool chain was part of the development process. To build the engine, they had to teach themselves assembler.
For the listener who might not be super technical, can you break down what learning assembler actually meant in 1991?
Sure. So today, if you write code, it's usually in a high-level language that looks somewhat like English. Assembler is low-level. You are practically speaking directly to the processor's registers.
Wow.
It is notoriously difficult, it's verbose, and it is completely unforgiving. And remember, they didn't learn it from a coding boot camp. They learned it from magazines.
That concept alone is wild to me. The source describes them typing out several hundred lines of code copied manually from a magazine just to get their drawing tools working.
That was the primary distribution method for knowledge back then. You bought a magazine, you opened the back pages, and there was the raw hex code.
Just pages of numbers and letters.
Exactly. You had to type it in character by character, and if you made a single typo like an O instead of a 0, the program would just crash.
No helpful error message telling you which line was wrong.
No error message at all, just a crash. It forced a level of discipline that is really rare today because the cost of failure was just so incredibly high.
And they used this self-taught assembler to do some pretty advanced stuff. There's a specific mention of an image compiler they built.
This is where the engineering gets genuinely impressive. They had about 30 images for the different scenes in the game. On an Amstrad CPC, memory is incredibly scarce.
Right, you can't just drop 30 high-res JPEGs in a folder.
Not at all. If they just stored the raw images, they wouldn't fit on the floppy disk, or they would take literal minutes to load a single screen.
So they invented their own compression algorithm.
Essentially, yes. They read about the theoretical principle of data compression in a rare book. Just the concept, mind you, not the actual code. And then they wrote a custom routine in assembler to strip out redundant data and reconstruct the image on the fly.
They reinvented the wheel just because they had to.
They absolutely had to.
There is another technical detail that I think really highlights their naivety, or maybe just their sheer audacity. The interface. They wanted a mouse pointer.
Which the Amstrad CPC did not natively support in the way they envisioned. They wanted that smooth Macintosh-style desktop experience.
Alvarez writes that they, quote, tore their hair out trying to program a fake cursor system that felt responsive. They were trying to simulate a 16-bit experience on 8-bit hardware.
And they did all of this, writing the story, composing the music, building the tools, writing the engine in under 2 years.
While still doing their high school homework.
It's a testament to the neuroplasticity of teenagers, I suppose. They just didn't know it was supposed to be impossible.
Okay, so they have a finished game. Alive is finally ready. Now comes the transition from the bedroom to the boardroom. Or, well, what they thought would be a boardroom.
The publishing story, this is where the document shifts from a technical log to a very humble, very human comedy.
They send the game out on floppy disks. And Lankhor, which was a respectable French publisher at the time, actually bites. They like it. They invite the boys to Paris to sign a real publishing contract.
Now, put yourself in their shoes for a second. You are a kid from Toulouse. You are going to the capital to meet the executives of a software company.
You're probably imagining a glass skyscraper, suits, maybe a company limo waiting for you at the train station.
And the reality?
The reality is Bruno Gourier, one of the founders of Lankhor, picking them up in a rusty white Peugeot 104.
I love that detail. Alvarez specifically notes the car was pitted by rust.
And Gourier isn't even the one driving. His girlfriend is driving. It just immediately grounds the story. The video game industry in 1991 was not the multi-billion-dollar titan it is today.
It was a cottage industry. People were working out of pure passion, often on very thin margins.
So they get to the Lankhor, quote-unquote, headquarters, which turned out to be a 60-square-meter apartment.
Which is basically just a large living room. Alvarez notes the team was super small and driven by enthusiasm rather than profit. But that informal atmosphere probably saved them, because almost immediately upon arrival, we have the coffee incident.
Oh man, this is painful to even read about.
It's the ultimate imposter syndrome moment. Alvarez is completely overwhelmed. He's sitting there with the contract, literally the most important document of his young life, and he's holding a cup of coffee.
And inevitably, he spills it.
All over the publisher's contract.
I think I would have just walked out. I would have taken the next train back to Toulouse and never touched a keyboard again.
It humanizes the interaction completely, though. These weren't slick corporate negotiators. They were just nervous kids. But Lankhor was totally cool about it. They dried off the paperwork, signed it anyway, and took them out to lunch.
And that lunch sounds like it was an education in itself. They got to hear industry secrets about another game, Manoir de Mortfiel.
Which was a legendary title in France. It featured voice synthesis. The computer actually spoke to you. In 1991, that was basically witchcraft.
For Alvarez and Laplace, sitting there listening to the creators explain how they manipulated the sound chips, it must have been mind-blowing.
Absolutely.
There is one more detail about that office visit that I think is crucial for understanding the era. It's about how they marketed games back then. Alvarez mentions that screen capture functionality didn't really exist.
Not in any way we think of it today. You couldn't just hit a hotkey and save a JPEG of the gameplay. The video memory was completely locked in the hardware.
So if a publisher like Lankhor wanted to put a screenshot of a lamp on the back of the game box or in a magazine, what did they have to do?
They had to set up a physical tripod with a film camera, darken the room completely, and physically photograph the CRT monitor.
It sounds so archaic, but it really emphasizes how trapped the data was inside the machine. There was a physical barrier between the digital world and the real world that just doesn't exist anymore.
It also meant that the visual fidelity you saw in magazines was often blurry or distorted by the curve of the glass screen. It added to the mystery of games back then.
So the contract is signed, coffee stands and all. The game launches. They actually get the thrill of seeing their box on the shelves at major stores like FNAC. The teenage dream is realized.
But then the math kicks in. The harsh economic reality of the release.
They sold about 2,000 copies, which makes me wonder, is that good?
For a debut title from unknown high school developers in a niche adventure genre, it's respectable. It wasn't a total flop, but financially, they earned roughly 1,200 euros each.
1,200 euros. For 2 years of learning assembler for magazines, building custom compilers, and tearing their hair out over a mouse cursor.
It works out to pennies per hour. But Alvarez is very clear in the text that the memory of doing it was worth way more than the money. The issue wasn't really the quality of the game anyway, it was the timing. We have to look at the specific year. 1991.
We're at the era of the bit wars.
Exactly. The Amstrad CPC was an 8-bit machine. But by 1991, the 16-bit generation computers like the Amiga 500 and the Atari ST had already aggressively taken over the market.
Alvarez actually writes that the hardware they were developing for was giving up the ghost.
They were squeezing every drop of performance out of a dying ecosystem. It's the classic innovator's dilemma. By the time they had completely mastered the Amstrad, the gaming audience had moved on.
But Lankhor did invite them to make a PC version later, right?
They did. A version called Alive Behind the Moon came out in 1994, but that project required a team of 14 people.
So Alive on the Amstrad really marked the end of their garage coding phase.
It was the swan song of the two-person operation for them. The industry simply became too complex and scaled up too fast for two kids in a bedroom to compete.
But the story doesn't end in the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where the deep dive gets really fascinating because we jump forward to the internet age. The game eventually becomes abandonware.
Which means the commercial life is over. The copyright is sort of in a gray area. The game is just floating around on enthusiast preservation sites like Lankhor.net.
And with the internet comes the inevitable internet confusion, because the game is simply called Alive.
Yes, a very common English word.
And there happens to be a very famous book and movie also called Alive.
The true story of the Uruguayan rugby team crashing in the Andes Mountains, where they had to resort to cannibalism to survive. A horrific tragedy.
Right. So Alvarez finds a discussion on a gaming blog where a user who clearly had never played the Amstrad game is completely horrified. They assume these two French developers made a cannibalism simulator.
The user was just baffled. They couldn't understand why anyone would adapt that specific real-world tragedy into a retro adventure game.
It's so funny, but it really shows how context evaporates online. The title survived, but the meaning was completely rewritten by strangers who didn't know the history.
But then amidst all that confusion, someone actually played it. Enter Mr. POE.
The unexpected hero of our story. Mr. POE is a YouTuber. Sometime before 2012, he uploaded a complete playthrough of Alive, a 77-minute video.
And why was this such a big deal for Alvarez?
Well, it acted as a mirror.
Yeah.
Alvarez hadn't seen his own game running in 20 years. He probably didn't even have a working Amstrad computer anymore. Watching Mr. POE play it on YouTube was a revelation, but also a bit of a shock.
How so?
He realized just how incredibly difficult they had made the game. He explicitly apologizes in the document for youthful programming errors.
It was more than just bugs, wasn't it? It was the core design philosophy.
Oh yeah, the game had absolutely no save function.
Wait, let's pause on that. No save function in a narrative puzzle adventure game.
None. Zero. You had to beat the entire game in a single sitting if you died. Back to the start if your mom called you for dinner and you had to turn off the computer. Back to the start.
It sounds absolutely punishing.
It was brutal. And not only that, you were constantly flipping floppy disks in and out of the drive to load different areas. Alvarez realizes that because they were the creators, they obviously knew all the puzzle solutions and the optimal path. So to them, it seemed easy.
They never did a blind playtest with strangers.
Nope. They just shipped it. That is the ultimate blind spot of the bedroom coder. You assume the player knows exactly what you know.
Exactly. But Mr. POE's video serves a much higher purpose than just exposing the brutal difficulty of 90s games. And this brings us to the core message of the source text, that title, Tribute to Those Who Pay Tribute.
It sounds a bit like a riddle at first.
It's an inversion of how we usually think about fandom. Usually we expect fans to pay tribute to the creators, thank you for making this amazing game. But Alvarez is doing the exact opposite here. He is actively thanking the internet pirate, the unofficial archivist, the random YouTuber.
Because without someone like Mr. POE, Alive essentially ceases to exist.
Correct. The physical floppy disks from 1991 are actively rotting. The magnetic data degrades over time. The old Amstrad computers are breaking down and ending up in landfills. Without someone taking the time to emulate it, record it, and upload it to a server, that entire history just vanishes.
Alvarez actually calls these people courageous testers and archaeologists.
It completely reframes the whole concept of a Let's Play video on YouTube. We might casually think of them as just cheap entertainment or background noise. But for a piece of obscure software from 1991, that video is literally a museum exhibit. It documents the existence and the experience of the work.
It really highlights the fragility of our digital heritage. We tend to have this bias where we think, oh, it's on a computer, it's digital, so it's forever.
But it's the exact opposite. Digital is incredibly fragile. File formats change. Proprietary hardware dies. Corporate servers get wiped to save money.
That's a really scary thought when you apply it to today's landscape. Think about modern apps or games. They often live entirely on the cloud.
Exactly. Alive at least had a physical cardboard box. You could hold the floppy disk in your hands. If you buy a game today, you are often just buying a temporary license to access a remote server.
If a live service game shuts down its servers tomorrow, you just can't play it.
You can't emulate the server-side logic easily. There is no physical artifact left behind to put in a display case.
So in a weird way, we are actually in a more precarious position now with preservation than they were in 1991.
In terms of digital persistence, absolutely. We are generating petabytes of culture every day that could disappear with a single keystroke or a company bankruptcy filing.
So Mr. PoE isn't just a guy playing a retro game for clicks. He's preserving a permanent record of human creativity.
He is ensuring that the literal tear-your-hair-out work of two ambitious teenagers in Toulouse doesn't get forgotten by time. He is closing the loop.
It's a really lovely thought. The creator launches the ship into the ocean, but it's the community that keeps it afloat decades later.
And that is the true tribute Alvarez is talking about. He recognizes that he lost ownership of the game the moment he released it into the wild, but the community gave it a second life.
So what's the big takeaway here for you listening?
I think it's a call to value these obscure digital artifacts. When you stumble across an old GeoCities-style blog or a weird wiki page or a YouTube video with 300 views documenting an old piece of software, recognize the value in that. That person is doing the vital work of a digital historian.
And for any creators listening, whether you are coding an indie game, writing a story, or making art, maybe take a page out of Alvarez's book, don't be ashamed of your old work, even the parts with youthful programming errors.
Especially those parts, that's where the humanity actually is. That's the coffee stain on the contract.
Perfectly said. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of Alive, the Amstrad CPC, and the rusty Peugeots of the early French gaming industry.
It was a fantastic trip back in time.
Thanks for joining us on this one. And here's a final provocative thought to leave you with. We trust the cloud with our photos, our memories, our creative work. But if the internet went dark tomorrow, permanently, what part of your digital life would actually still exist? Do you have a floppy disk equivalent for the things that really matter to you?
That definitely makes you want to print out a few family photos tonight.
It certainly does. We'll see you on the next deep dive.